It was a cold day in October when I told my parents I was gay. We were sitting in the living room, my father in his usual armchair, my mom on the couch flipping through a magazine. I was sweating and struggling to keep my hands steady, even though I'd spent years preparing for this moment. The silence between us felt like a thick wall. "Mom, Dad, there's something I need to tell you," I began, my voice shaky but determined. They both looked up, sensing the seriousness of my tone. I took a deep breath and said it as simply as I could. "I'm gay." For a second, no one moved. Then my mother's face twisted in shock. She dropped the magazine, as if it were suddenly too heavy, and looked at me with disbelief, like I'd told her I was a criminal. My father's face went blank, his eyes darkening. "You're what?" My mother finally spat out, her voice thick with anger. "Are you saying you're a lesbian?" "Yes," I replied quietly, bracing myself. I tried to explain, to help them understand that this wasn't a phase, that this was who I really was. But my father cut me off, his voice cold and sharp. "This is disgusting," he said. "This isn't how we raised you." And just like that, I was their daughter one moment and a stranger the next. Within an hour, they were telling me to leave. My mother shoved a small duffel bag into my arms, packed haphazardly with a few pieces of clothing and some toiletries. My father was silent, his face hard as stone, standing by the door as if to make sure I left. No apologies, no second chances, just a swift and brutal rejection. As I walked out, my mother muttered, "Don't come back until you've figured out who you're supposed to be." That was it. I was disowned for being myself. My little brother Jake watched from the window, his face confused and worried, but he didn't come outside. He was only 16 then, still under their control. I knew it wasn't his fault, and I didn't blame him, but I didn't expect to hear from him anytime soon. After that, I stayed with friends, scraping by until I managed to get into college on a scholarship. I was still angry and hurt, but I tried to focus on building a new life for myself. Over the years, I found friends who became my new family, people who loved and accepted me. I found a partner, Emily, who made me feel seen and valued in ways my own parents never had. I graduated, found a job, and eventually stopped waiting for my family to reach out. They didn't, and I told myself that was fine. But Jake did. A year or so after I moved, he started texting me in secret. We didn't talk much, and he avoided bringing up our parents, but it was nice to know he hadn't completely forgotten about me. I knew he was still stuck at home, under their thumb, and I hoped that one day he'd find the courage to leave too. Fast forward 6 years. I was sitting at home with Emily one evening, scrolling through some work emails, when my phone buzzed with a call from a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I wouldn't have answered, but something made me pick up. "Hello." There was a long pause on the other end, then a voice I hadn't heard in years, my mother's. "Hey, it's Mom." Her voice was strained, thick with something I couldn't quite place. Maybe regret, maybe desperation. I was speechless for a moment. "Why are you calling?" There was another pause. Then she blurted, "Your brother's in trouble." It turned out Jake had been arrested, caught up with a bad crowd who'd led him into some criminal activity. He was facing serious charges, and my parents, completely out of their depth, had no idea what to do. Apparently, the friends they'd always relied on for advice were suddenly nowhere to be found, and now they were desperate. "Can you help us?" she asked. Her voice was almost pleading, but there was a sharp edge to it, too, like she thought I owed her this. I took a long breath, trying to process. "You disowned me, remember? You kicked me out without a second thought. That was, look, we were upset, okay? We didn't know what to do," she said, her tone defensive. "But this is about Jake. He's your brother." "Oh, now he's my brother?" I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. "Where were you when I needed a family?" "Please," she said, almost whispering. "Just help us this one time." I closed my eyes, thinking of Jake. Despite everything, he was still my brother, the one person who'd never fully turned his back on me. After a long, silent moment, I said, "Fine, but there's one condition. If I help you, you accept me. All of me. No more pretending, no more judgment. You treat me with respect." There was a long silence. Then, finally, she said, "Fine." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into helping Jake. I found a lawyer willing to take his case for a reduced fee, spent countless hours in meetings, and sat through hearing after hearing. Jake was grateful, apologetic even, and we started to rebuild some of the closeness we'd lost. But my parents? It was as if they'd forgotten our deal the moment I agreed to help. Instead of gratitude, they seemed to think they could pick up right where we'd left off, ordering me around and making demands. One afternoon, my mother called, not to check on Jake's progress or thank me for my help, but to say, "We're running low on money for all these legal fees. You're going to help cover them, right?" I was floored. "Excuse me? We're still family, aren't we?" she said, her tone sharp. "We raised you, fed you, put you through school. Don't you think it's your responsibility to help us now?" "You kicked me out," I reminded her. "I survived on my own. I've done everything on my own. So what? You're just going to abandon us now that we need you." Her words hit a nerve, but I refused to give in. "If you want my help, you respect my boundaries. Otherwise, I'm done." She hung up on me. The next week, my father pulled a new trick. He called my workplace, pretending to be concerned about my personal situation and suggesting that it might be affecting my work. It was a cheap attempt to scare me, to make me feel like I was in danger of losing my job if I didn't give them what they wanted. Luckily, my boss was understanding, and when I explained the situation, she assured me my job was safe. When I confronted my father about it, he didn't deny it. "I was just trying to get through to you," he said, his voice cold and unapologetic. "You need to learn how to put family first." "Family?" I laughed bitterly. "You haven't been my family in years. You threw me out. You disowned me because you couldn't handle who I am. And now you think you can just waltz back into my life and make demands?" He had nothing to say to that, so I hung up on him. The final straw came a few days later when I found out that my mother had been trying to turn Jake against me. She'd been calling him over 4 family dinners, where she'd spend hours bad-mouthing me, claiming I was selfish, that I thought I was too good for them, and that I was going to abandon him the first chance I got. She was trying to guilt-trip him into siding with them, hoping he'd pressure me into doing whatever they wanted. When Jake told me about it, his voice was hesitant. "I don't know, maybe she's right. You haven't really been around, you know? Maybe you should, I don't know, maybe help them a little more." It hurt to hear him say it, but I knew he was caught in their web. "Jake," I said firmly, "they're using you to get to me. They don't care about you. They just want control." He was silent for a long moment, and then he said quietly, "Yeah, I think I knew that. I'm sorry." I squeezed his shoulder. "Don't be. Just don't let them pull you down with them." After that, I set firm boundaries. I told my parents in no uncertain terms that if they continued to act entitled, manipulative, and disrespectful, I would cut them off completely. I would help Jake, but I owed them nothing. For the first time, I felt like I was taking back control. They didn't take it well, of course. They tried calling, sending messages full of guilt trips and half-baked apologies. But I stood my ground. I knew they were only sorry that they'd lost control over me. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted a pawn. But as time went on, Jake started to come around more. We rebuilt our relationship, slowly but steadily, free from our parents' interference. He even met Emily, who welcomed him with open arms. I could tell he